All right, let's talk economics. Today, we're basically going to build you a new pair of glasses, an economic lens, if you will, to see the world a little differently. We're going to break down those core ideas that control, well, pretty much everything, from the price of your coffee to how entire countries trade with each other.
Okay, so here's the game plan. First, we're going to tackle the one big problem that economics is all about solving. Then, we'll peek into the economist toolkit, see what makes markets tick, figure out why they sometimes, break down, and wrap it all up by looking at how we keep score for a whole economy. So let's get right to it. The entire field of economics, and I mean all of it, boils down to one single universal problem. And it's something that connects everyone, whether you're in Somalia or Silicon Valley. It hits us all. And that problem starts with a question that, honestly, sounds like something a 5-year-old would ask. But don't let that fool you. This simple question is the absolute starting point for all economic thinking. It makes us face a really basic truth about the world we live in. And the answer? It's one word: scarcity. You see, economics exists in that huge gap between our endless, unlimited wants and the very, very limited stuff we have to work with. And this isn't just about empty shelves during a panic. No, it's that constant tug of war we all feel every single day between what we wish we had and what we can actually have. So, to get any of the things we want, we need to use some mix of these 4 key ingredients, right? These are the building blocks of any economy. Let's take a pizza, for example. The land, that's all the natural stuff: the flour, the tomatoes, the water. Labor is the person tossing the dough. Capital is the physical tool, like the big pizza oven. And entrepreneurship, that's the spark. It's the person who had the idea and took the risk to open up the pizza shop to begin with. Okay, now here's something that trips up so many people, so let's clear it up right now. When an economist says capital, they are not talking about money. Not at all. Capital is the physical stuff you use to make other stuff. It's the hammer, the delivery truck, the laptop. Money, well, money is just the social tool we invented to buy the capital. Big difference. And all this leads to one of the most important ideas in all of economics: opportunity cost. The idea is that every single choice you make has a hidden cost. So let's say you spend a few hours binge watching a show. The cost isn't zero, even if you're using a friend's Netflix. The opportunity cost is the value of the next best thing you gave up. Maybe that's working on a project, or hitting the gym, or even just getting some sleep. It's the value of that road not taken. All right, so we've established that economics is all about making choices under scarcity. But how do economists actually study this stuff? How do they make sense of a world that's just ridiculously complex? Well, they've got a special toolkit. Let's take a look. And of course, it wouldn't be economics without some fancy Latin, would it? Ceteris paribus. It literally just means all other things being equal. This is a super important trick economists use. To figure out how one thing affects another, they have to pretend, just for a second, that everything else in the universe is frozen in place. It's like their version of a science lab experiment. Now, this next quote from Adam Smith, basically the founding father of modern economics, was absolutely revolutionary for its time. He's saying, look, the reason you have dinner on your table isn't because the baker and the butcher are these incredibly nice people who just want to help you out. Nope. It's because they're looking out for themselves. It's their self-interest that drives the whole system. And that idea, it really sets the stage for this massive debate that has defined economics for hundreds of years. You've got Adam Smith on one side with his idea of the invisible hand, this belief that when everyone chases their own self-interest, it somehow magically benefits all of society. But then you've got Karl Marx on the other side, looking at the exact same system and seeing something totally different. He didn't see harmony. He saw conflict, exploitation, a struggle between the owners and the workers. Okay, get ready, because this next idea is maybe one of the most powerful and frankly weirdest sounding concepts in economics. It's called comparative advantage, and it explains why it's a good idea for people and countries to trade with each other, even if one person is better at doing everything. Seriously, it's not about who's the best. It's about who gives up the least to do something. Let's make this real. Look at this example with Paul and art. Paul is a genius, right? He can write 2 songs an hour or do 2 surgeries. Art's a bit slower at songwriting, only 1 song an hour, but he can also do 2 surgeries. So your first instinct might be, well, Paul's better. He should just do everything. But that's where opportunity cost comes in. Think about it. For Paul to do 1 surgery, he has to give up writing 1 song. But for Art to do a surgery, he only gives up writing half a song. So Art has the lower opportunity cost. He has the comparative advantage in surgery. It makes way more sense for Art to do the surgeries, letting Paul focus on writing those hit songs. They both win.
Okay, so we've got a handle on how individuals make choices, right? It's all about scarcity and opportunity cost. Now, let's zoom the camera out. What happens when you get millions of people all making these choices at the same time? Well, you get markets. Let's see how they work. First thing to know, not all markets are created equal. You can think of them on a spectrum of competition. At one extreme, you have perfect competition. Think of thousands of farmers selling identical bushels of wheat. On the total opposite end, you've got a monopoly. One company controls everything. But most of the real world lives somewhere in between. Think about restaurants or airlines. There's competition, but not an infinite amount, and their products aren't identical. Now, to really get how competition works, we have to talk about profit. But economists see two kinds. First, there's accounting profit. That's the simple one you already know. Money in minus money out. Are you making more than you're spending? But then there's economic profit. This asks a much deeper question. Are you making more money than you would in your next best option? And here's the kicker. In a really competitive market, if someone starts making a big economic profit, it's like a giant neon sign flashing free money here. It attracts tons of new competition, and that competition drives those extra profits all the way down to zero. So that invisible hand from Adam Smith, it's incredibly powerful, but it's not perfect. Sometimes it completely fumbles. We call these market failures. And when that happens, governments often feel the need to step in and fix things. But as we'll see, those fixes can sometimes make things even weirder.
Yeah, markets are amazing engines for creating stuff we want, but they have some serious blind spots. For example, a free market would probably never build national defense or a lighthouse. Why? Because you can't really stop someone from using them. So how do you charge for it? That's a public good. Markets also ignore externalities. Those are side effects, like the pollution a factory pumps into a river that affects the town downstream. And finally, you have the tragedy of the commons. This is when a shared resource, like a public fishing spot, gets totally destroyed because it's in every single person's individual interest to catch as many fish as they can right now before the next person does.
So when you see these kinds of problems, it's natural for governments to want to intervene. And one of the most common ways they do that is with something called a price ceiling. The intention is usually really good. Let's make something important, like housing or medicine, more affordable by putting a legal cap on how high the price can go.
But, and this is a huge but, here comes the unintended consequence. This chart shows it perfectly. If you've ever tried to find an apartment in a city with strict rent control, you've lived this. When the government forces the price down with a ceiling, what happens? Well, landlords have less reason to rent out apartments, so the supply goes down. But for renters, the price is great, so demand goes way up. You end up with way more people wanting apartments than there are apartments available. And that big gap right there, that's a shortage.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground, from individual choices to market glitches. For our last piece of the puzzle, let's pull the camera way, way back and look at the big picture. How do we actually measure the health of an entire country's economy? How do we know if we're winning or losing? The main scorecard, the one you always hear about in the news, is GDP, Gross Domestic Product. The easiest way to think about it is it's the total price tag of every single thing a country makes and does in 1 year. It's the size of the whole economic pie. But you have to know, it's a very imperfect measure. For example, a giant hurricane that requires billions in rebuilding makes GDP go up. It doesn't measure the environmental quality, it doesn't measure if we're happy, it's just a number. And just like a doctor doesn't just say you're sick, an economist doesn't just say unemployment is up. They diagnose different types of it. You've got frictional unemployment. That's just the natural healthy churn of people switching between jobs. No big deal. Then there's structural. This is more serious. It's when there's a mismatch between the skills workers have and the jobs that are actually available. Think coal miners in a world shifting to solar. And then there's cyclical unemployment. That's the really scary one that's tied to recessions, when businesses everywhere are laying people off. You have to know which kind you're dealing with before you can even think about a solution.
So, where does that leave us? I think the biggest takeaway is that economics almost never gives you a simple, clean, right answer. What it does give you is a powerful lens. It trains you to see the world as a complex web of trade-offs. And so often, that trade-off is between freedom for the individual and the well-being of the group. Economics won't tell you what to choose, but it will hopefully make the costs and benefits of that choice a whole lot clearer. And from there, well, the choice is ours to debate.